Sir, is it possible to rent a room? The echo of the words pronounced by the young man in leather armor reverberated through the enormous hall, leaving everybody's faces, Daniel's included, contorted in a mix of astonishment and surprise. Quietness reigned in the hall for a few moments until one voice after the other started to resound. I would like to rent a room as well. Sir, please take us in. Me too, please. Daniel had hundreds of unanswered questions in his mind. Apparently, the old man had retired from being the master-at-arms of Carolus 2 years ago. Being a powerful cultivator and an expert in many sorts of weapons, he had instructed various of the highest-ranking officers within the kingdom and even members of the royal family. After retiring, he decided to purchase the hotel. His actions didn't go unnoticed, as many powerful forces had located him within the city of Fury. The master-at-arms was an excellent teacher, and his ability to nurture the weapon mastery and character of his disciples had been so widely known that many powerful forces tried to rope him into their groups. The master-at-arms was one of the instructors of the royal palace, so none of these powers were capable of forcing him to join them. The only viable alternative was to send their prodigies to him and let them be shaped by the teachings of this powerful figure. They would then return to their forces and learn their families, sects, and school's signature arts. 2 long years had passed since the old man had purchased the hotel, and yet many talented members of the younger generation had been rejected. The reason had always been that the master-at-arms refused to take in any disciple. When all these powerful forces were starting to consider this as the end of this old monster's career, a young man and 2 young women had been allowed in the hotel by the master-at-arms himself. The news spread like wildfire. All the cultivators placed to monitor the old man's actions reported to their factions immediately. Their response was to send their most talented disciples and hope for them to be accepted as well. The 30 young men and women within the group were members of some of Fear's factions, and if Daniel hadn't left the lobby, he would have seen them arrive one after the other. Suddenly, a similar but calmer voice than the previous was heard from behind the group. The rent is 1 gold coin each month. As the group turned around and noticed the old man standing behind them, they collectively bowed to him deeply. Get up. I'm not your teacher. I'm your landlord, said the old man in a slightly annoyed tone, before walking towards the stairs and starting to explain. Go pick a room, then leave the payment. The explanation of the building's utilities was the same as the one Daniel, Rayla, and Maya had received. It was at that moment that Daniel realized he hadn't simply rented 3 rooms inside a dismissed hotel owned by a solitary old man. He had paid the membership for a martial arts school started by a retired monster. That was only partially true, provided that the school wasn't an official one and that the old man never promised any teaching. The reason why he had purchased the hotel and had training grounds built in it was to start a sort of school in which anyone could join. He was tired of teaching to proud children of powerful factions. He hoped to find disciples with no backing and good morale to which he could impart his teachings, and that they would then pass these teachings to others in the future. For 2 years he had waited, until one day a couple of young girls arrived at his door. One of them was forthright and of a good nature. He liked this type of people the most, and every time he tried to shape the character of one of his disciples, he would try to turn them into this kind of people. The second girl, to his stupor, was the young mistress of the ruling house and daughter of one of his first and most successful disciples, the master of the ruling house, Dirar Rulin. The old man had always felt guilty about not being able to prevent the extermination of the ruling house. He had been their master's teacher and had imparted morale and strength of character to him. To believe that he would defect to another kingdom, that was bullshit. Pure and simple. The 2 young girls looked for a place to stay. That was when he decided that the 2 would be the starting point of his school. 2 days later, the past 2 days had been chaotic. Every day, a few young cultivators would arrive at the hotel and ask to be taken as disciples. But after receiving a clean rejection, they would almost always try to rent a room. It was clear that most of them had been warned that the only option to stay was to rent a room and becoming one of the building's tenants. Daniel wasn't too happy about it, but he had to admit that having this building all for themselves was simply unrealistic. Somebody else was bound to come. He just didn't expect so many people to come so soon. In the past couple of days, Daniel had managed to reach the peak of the vasodilation substage. But before he could break through, he had finished his beast cores. What was left of the 20 gold coins that he had received from the auction, after paying for their debt and for the rooms, was less than a half. Daniel knew what he needed to do. He needed to hunt for more powerful beasts and sell their cores. He needed more resources to break through. And in order to obtain more resources, he required money. But before doing that, he needed to learn how to use weapons. He had the strength, but he couldn't go around hunting for rank 3 beast with a rock in his hand. Daniel knew nothing about weapons, so all he could do was go by his needs, and what he needed was a weapon for distance and a weapon for close-range combat. Without thinking about it too much, he headed towards the training grounds. The training grounds were none other than an enormous backyard separated into 4 sections. The first section had various square rings whose sides were attached, making it possible for it to be used as a single large stage. The second section had numerous practice dummies, and weapon racks furnished with all kinds of wooden and regular weapons were placed all around. The third was filled with different instruments to enhance the body's strength and endurance. Ultimately, the last section contained various obstacle courses and structures to practice one's agility and equilibrium. After reaching the training grounds, what surprised Daniel was that the place was completely filled with people. Most of the young men and women that had arrived in the last 2 days were here, and of the first 30 people, none were missing. Some of them were practicing the basics, others were sparring, and some were even trying their techniques against wooden dummies. These practice dummies, like the chandeliers, had been magically enchanted. No matter the damage they received, they would rapidly repair themselves in just a few seconds. Daniel found a free corner and sat on the ground. He then took a book out of his backpack and started reading. Those who noticed his actions were slightly annoyed, but when they noticed what book he was reading, their face changed, contorted into a mixture of outrage and disdain. The book that Daniel was reading was called The Very Basics of Swordplay and was the most basic manual of practicing the sword. Amongst these young cultivators, every single sword wielder had studied this book right after learning how to read. Daniel immersed himself in reading the manual, and after an hour and a half, he closed it and got up on his feet. He then started walking towards the weapon rack. After reaching the weapon rack, he took a practice sword and went back to his corner. He then started to slowly practice the basics of swordsmanship. When the various cultivators noticed Daniel's awkwardness when practicing the basics of the sword, they lost interest in him and focused back on their training. Nobody was paying attention to Daniel anymore. Time slowly passed as Daniel stayed in his corner. What nobody had noticed were the changes in his mastery. In fact, if one were to look closely, they would notice that after just 10 sets, Daniel had become used to the feel of the sword. After 25 sets, his motions hardly contained any mistake, and after 25 more, he had mastered the basics of the swordsmanship described by the book. After less than 3 hours, Daniel had mastered how to hold the sword, the various stances, and a few types of simple attacks. When Daniel was about to stop, the eyes of some of the present ended on him, and when they noticed his level of swordsmanship, the disdain on their faces became deeper than ever. Everyone who had looked at him had thought that he had simply pretended to be just starting to learn swordsmanship, and that he wanted to appear as a prodigy in front of the old man. In their minds, that was the only explanation that made sense. Before they could manage to send a few insults, or even start a fight with him, their eyes opened to an unnatural degree and their backs straightened like a set of brooms. Behind Daniel, the old man had appeared out of thin air and was standing quietly. Daniel had finished his practice, as he didn't find any purpose in training further with the basics of the sword. When he was about to turn around to head back to the weapon rack, he noticed the unsettled looks on the faces of the others. But he rapidly noticed that these looks weren't directed at him. He slowly turned around and found the old man standing behind him. "Old man, eat something?" said Daniel. A proverbial ton of bricks fell on the heads of everyone present. The face of the old man was unchanged, his right arm still behind his back while the other raised in front of his chest, accompanying his hand into a slow brushing of his beard. He looked like he was pondering something. After a few moments of silence, Daniel added, "Okay. Well, I have to go now. If you need something, you before stopping." The old man's right arm started moving from behind his back, and when he moved it in front of him, Daniel saw that it was holding a book and halberd. The old man's actions surprised Daniel greatly, not only because the old man had taken a weapon and a book from behind his back, but because the halberd was at least 2.5 meters tall, standing much higher than the old man. How the old man managed to hide it behind his body was a mystery to him. Looking at the young man in front of him, the old man stopped brushing his beard and finally said, "It'll give you 5 hours. Learn how to use this halberd, and you won't need to pay your rent for 2 months." His low, yet powerful voice reached every corner of the training grounds. Daniel's face changed immediately. 2 gold coins in exchange of 5 hours of training. That wasn't an opportunity he was willing to let go. "Deal," he responded calmly. He took the halberd from the old man's hand and put it on the ground. He then grabbed the book and started reading through its pages. The title of the book was Basic Guide on Polearms Training. Before starting to study the book's content, he thought, "Suh, mind activating the system for me once again." Chapter 17, I Don, Teeny to Teacher Suh, mind activating the system for me once again. After accepting the old man's conditions, Daniel started to study the basics of polearms wielding. 2 hours later, he picked up the halberd from the ground and started to practice the basic moves, body movements, and familiarize with the weapon. To the eyes of the spectating group of people that had gathered around the two, what Daniel was doing was acting. Inside the old man's mind, different thoughts had started to form. He was torn between two possibilities. The first was that Daniel was a prodigy capable of learning the use of weapons 100 times faster than a normal person, while the second was that he had been pretending. He had reasons to believe both of these possibilities to be false. For example, such a speed in learning the use of weapons was unheard of, provided that one was a genius and understood perfectly the theory behind the basics of weapon wielding. They would still need practice to get used to the weight and maneuverability of the weapon. Regarding his second hypothesis, Daniel, in order to be able to fool him by pretending to be a beginner, would not only need to have mastered the use of the sword, but also reached a perfect mastery of its most advanced stages. That is why he had given him the halberd and the beginner manual for polearms. He believed that, if he was a true prodigy, he would have been able to see stunning results from Daniel's brief training. He was also certain that, even if Daniel had been a master in the use of the sword, he wouldn't have had the time to master 2 different weapons to such a level. The old man's face was as calm as ever, and he quietly stood with his eyes glued to Daniel. The young men and women that had been practicing in the training grounds were now surrounding the two and discussing quietly. What's the point of this test? Most of us mastered the basics of various weapons. The brat is just boasting. We all could pretend to be beginners and to be learning something we already know at an amazing speed. Most of them were convinced that Daniel had been cheating the old man, but there were a few, hidden within the group, that were looking attentively at Daniel. They had been warned by their powers that the old man hardly showed attention to untalented disciples, and that it was almost impossible to be fooled. Amongst these few people were the young man in leather armor, the handsome young man with long hair, and the girl with the folding fan that accompanied the one who had attacked Daniel. The 2 young men approached the girl, and the handsome young man said to her, "Riri, what do you think?" The girl turned around and noticed the 2 young men standing behind her. She then answered, "You use the rapier. That's an unusual weapon. Do you have a manual for it?" "I have stopped practicing the basics years ago," he said before turning towards the young man in leather armor, Nilo. "Do you have a manual of martial arts to test him with?" Nilo, the young man in leather armor, said, "Let's first see how he handles the halberd." His eyes bright and curious. One would imagine a martial artist like Nilo to be more direct and impulsive, but that wasn't him. He had always been cautious and tried to observe the situation before acting. It was by observing the situation that he had befriended the handsome young man with long hair. A few years back, he was roaming the kingdom when he had heard sudden screams coming from a nearby place. After reaching the source of the noise, he saw a young man attacking a woman. This woman had fairly good looks, but wore commoner's clothes. She had a terrified look on her face, and her cries for help sounded desperate. In front of her stood a young man wielding a thin 1-meter-long sword. One would immediately think that the woman had been in danger, and that the young man had ill intentions, but he didn't act right away. He observed and noticed that the young man's back had a black spot which stained his otherwise spotlessly clean white shirt. He had also noticed that his breath was weak, his hair disheveled, and his legs were shaking. After noticing the young martial artist, the handsome young man had told him to stay away, for his own good, that had made him curious about the woman. So he observed her attentively and noticed that her hands were a little too smooth, without the slightest sign to testify a rough life. In his mind, a thought formed. How did this woman escape a younger and trained man? In the end, he had learned that the woman was an assassin sent by the Purple Leaf Sect, a known assassin sect, with the mission of assassinating the handsome young man. After realizing that the handsome young man wasn't threatening him, but was instead trying to prevent him from getting into this mess instead, he decided to treat his injuries. They then traveled together and became friends. His instincts were telling him, once again, that he needed to observe before judging. Half an hour had passed since Daniel had finished studying the manual. His progress were rapidly witnessed by the old man and the crowd. Daniel had found the halberd slightly more difficult to get used to. Its weight was bigger, and it had to be balanced on a much longer shape. It also required him to use both hands to wield it, which required him to have a better control of his body. But no matter how much more difficult it was, after 10 repetitions, he still got used to the new weapon. After 30, he hardly made any mistake, and after 50 more, his movements looked like the physical interpretation of the manual. In the crowd, next to Riri, the other fan-wielding girl had appeared. He is clearly faking it. It's just the basics. 3 months would be enough for us to master them as well, she said, with a hint of anger in her voice. I bet the old man is just humoring the brat out of boredom. Nobody is forcing you to stay here, Miri, said the handsome young man. You. MHH, she then turned around and left. Riri looked at him and said, you'll never get over it, will you? Her eyes rolled with annoyance before she focused back into looking at Daniel. A few minutes later, the 5 hours timeline had ended. Daniel was facing the old man. In his hands, the manual and the halberd. I bet hell slap him into smithereens. Hee. Maybe hell give him another weapon. As Daniel was about to hand the weapon and the book back to their owner, the old man turned towards the crowd and said a manual of martial arts basics in exchange for assisting to one of your training sessions. Before the words of the old man ended, Nilas's arm was already up. Every single pair of eyes within the crowd flashed in realization. The martial artists amongst the crowd started to bite their own teeth in regret. They had missed a chance. The old man looked at Nilo and nodded at him. Nilo walked amongst the crowd and reached the old man. He then presented himself while bowing. Nilo Gria, 15th generation disciple of the school of the swift palm of oppression. He then took a book out of his backpack and handed it over to the old man. The old man took notice of Nilas's rapid response. He appreciated attentive and cautious people. He had had many of these kinds of disciples in the past, and whenever he could, he tried to shape their cunning into avoiding problems instead of creating them. After taking the manual off his hands, he looked at Daniel once more and said, same deal. 3 hours. A year of free rent, said the old man while brushing his gray beard. A year added to the previous 2 months? Inquired Daniel while narrowing his eyes slightly. The corner of the old man's lips curved into a faint smile that disappeared the very next moment. That's right, he responded. Deal, said Daniel excitedly. The old man had been surprised by Daniel's talent. Mastering 2 different kinds of weapons to that level, at his age, was nigh impossible. He was almost certain that Daniel was an unheard-of prodigy, and him learning the basics of martial arts would confirm his guess. Martial arts and weapons were hardly skills learned together. One's body evolved to perfect the use of the practitioner's weapon of choice or practice martial art. Daniel could have been a master with different kinds of weapons, but him being capable in martial arts as well was like expecting a swimmer whose strongest parts of the body were shoulders, back, and arms to also be a great runner whose main focus was strengthening the legs. It is important to understand that in order to break through from the muscle strengthening stage, one didn't require to increase the mass of his muscles. One simply had to refine their existing muscles through the use of ki. Daniel had never practiced any martial art, nor had he shaped his muscles through the use of weapons. His body had always been lean and agile, perfect for a pickpocketer and petty thief such as himself. The manual of martial arts which Nilo had given to the old man was the basic of a commonly known martial art called true motion dash, and it was a martial art that, if properly learned, would help practitioners to avoid most unnecessary movements. The basics of true motion simply pointed out the correct ways of walking, running, and breathing. It also pointed out the most commonly made mistakes during these actions. Daniel finished reading the very limited yet detailed information contained within the manual in just 40 minutes. He then sat on the ground and started to practice the correct way of breathing. His karma points kept on slowly decreasing as he breathed in and out. He didn't require the system's help to learn how to do something. What the system was useful for was getting used to what he learned. For example, one could see the correct way of writing a letter when learning how to write, but they would need practice to get their hands used to the swift motions. What Daniel's system did was to interact with his ability to correct his own mistakes and help him avoid making them in the future. Breathing was a natural action for human beings and easy to control, so it didn't take long for Daniel to perfect his breathing. 10 minutes after he started to practice following the true motion instructions, his breath had already become stable, and a few more minutes later, the correct way of breathing had become natural to him. The same happened for his way of walking and running. His natural agility had helped him in perfecting his motion, and the karmic system had helped him in rapidly getting used to the recently learned correct ways. 2 hours after Daniel had started to practice the basics of true motion, and he had already completely mastered its teachings. The natural way in which Daniel had used the correct way walking when approaching the old man had surprised the entire crowd greatly. The old man was no exception. When Daniel stopped, he was standing right in front of the old man. The old man looked at him carefully, his hand still brushing his gray beard. After minutes of quietly observing Daniel, he finally opened his mouth and said, "Brat, how do you feel about becoming my student?" Daniel looked back at the old man, and without giving him the slightest bit of face, he said, "I don't need a teacher." Chapter 18, The Huntsman Guild. I don't need a teacher before the crowd could process the shock of witnessing the old man proposing to Daniel to become his student. His rapid response had forced them into quietness. For the next minute, the silence was deafening. The old man had been left speechless. From his point of view, Daniel had no reason to refuse. He was a prodigy in need of a teacher who could shape him into a great warrior, but he had been quickly rejected. The reason of Daniel's unexpected rejection was only known to him. While the crowd believed that Daniel was just a con man who had struck gold, and the old man believed him to be an undiscovered prodigy, the truth was much simpler. Daniel had ran out of karma points to spend. It was at the end of the practice with the basics of true motion that Sua had suggested that he should avoid accepting any other challenge, as he was almost completely out of karma points. After Sua's warning, Daniel checked his profile. Dan Heel, Karmic Systems wielder. Age 14 rank. Peak rank 3 of martial cultivation. Early rank 2 of spiritual cultivation karma. 99. Weapons masteries, details, martial arts, details. Daniel's profile had an overall change. His karma points had drastically decreased, his rank had been upgraded to the peak rank 3 of martial cultivation, and last but not least, new informations had appeared on his profile. Masteries. Details. Just as Daniel thought about the details of his masteries, the profile window expanded and a set of additional informations appeared on it. Dan Heel, Karmic Systems wielder. Age 14 rank. Peak rank 3 of martial cultivation. Early rank 2 of spiritual cultivation karma. 99. Weapon masteries, swords, 1% details, polearms, 3% details. After noticing the details of his masteries, a shiver run down Daniel's back. From the details given, He believed the karmic system to be capable of including every single martial art, weapon, and possibly even magic into the wielder's percentage of mastery. For curiosity, he thought about the details of his polearm's masteries, and a new window appeared. Polearms 3% bladed polearms, 10% thrusting polearms, 0% staffs, 0%. All this happened during the few seconds it took for Daniel to approach the old man, right after he had finished learning True Motion's basics. When the old man proposed to become his teacher, all he could do was refuse, because if the old man decided to start his teachings right away, he wouldn't be able to show the same level of results. What he needed now was to spend his last few karma points in learning how to use a throwing weapon and hunt for more beast cores. He didn't have an immediate need for money right now, and he would have gladly stayed in the hotel to master the use of every weapon he could find, but he had some pressing matters to take care of, like finding his uncle, who was currently being forced into slavery in the city's mines, or obtain enough resources to reach the perfect stage of the body strengthening stage. In front of everyone's unbelieving eyes, Daniel bowed towards the old man and left the training ground. After 12 straight hours of training, he needed to sleep. The next day, Daniel went back to training ground. As always, a large number of young men and women were practicing with their weapons martial arts. The moment Daniel stepped into the training grounds, various sets of eyes moved on him. He ignored the stares and started walking towards the weapon racks. Many were caught by surprise once again when they noticed the type of weapon Daniel had picked. What was in Daniel's hand was a small set of throwing knives. Daniel's weapon of choice for range combat were throwing knives, and he had two simple reasons for it. The first was that he didn't need a manual to learn how to throw knives, as everyone was capable of learning with enough practice. The second reason was that throwing knives were useful for sneak attacks and middle-range fights. As a pickpocketer, he had quick fingers, so this kind of weapon was suitable for him. After reaching the practice target, he started to train right away. The knives Daniel was using were made of a single piece of steel. There was no handle on the grip, and the only sharpened part was the blade. Their weight was completely balanced, which made them the easiest type of throwing knives to start practicing with. His first few throws were a complete failure, but he slowly got used to the weight and shape of the knives. The spectating practitioners didn't find it odd that Daniel would appear inexperienced at first. Many had witnessed how Daniel had mastered the basics of sword wielding, polearms wielding, and of the martial art True Motion Dash, while those who didn't witness it personally had at least heard of it. Daniel's progress was, as always, impressive. After only half an hour of uninterrupted training, he stopped missing the target. After 2 more hours, 2 out of 10 throws would hit the bullseye. After 4 hours of uninterrupted practice, only 1 throw out of 10 missed bullseye. This result was satisfactory to Daniel, so he left the training ground and went back into his room. Commoner's section, 3rd gate of the eastern wall, 810 Daniel was standing in front of a large building. This building was of a simple rectangular shape, and it stood about 15 meters high. Its large double doors had been blocked open, and many individuals dressed in light clothes and armed with various types of weapons moved in and out of the building in a constant stream. The only 2 details that made this building different from the others were the large dark green banners that draped down its walls, on which the silhouette of a stag had been sewn with golden thread. The other was the thick wooden sign that was hanging above the entrance. On it, carved in black, were 3 simple words: the Huntsman Guild. The Huntsman Guild, along with the Mercenary Union and the Golden Cauldron, were a few of the many organized groups tied to the Merchants Collective. To be more specific, any group whose main purpose was collecting herbs, beast cores, ranked beast carcasses, alchemical ingredients, or even offer protection services was strictly tied to the Merchants Collective, whose influence spanned through the entire kingdom. When Daniel had come back to the city, right after he had assisted to the battle between the 2 ranked beasts, he had claimed to have been sent from a herbalist to look for plants. That excuse implied that he had applied for a job at the Golden Cauldron, a group whose main goal is to collect alchemical ingredients, which they would then sell to the Merchants Collective or use themselves. Similarly to the Golden Cauldron, the main dealings of the Huntsman Guild was to send hunters in the area surrounding Fury to hunt and collect ranked beast cores and carcasses, which they would then sell to the Merchants Collective. The hunter's job had been a prestigious one in the past, but since the overall strength of the beasts around the city had drastically decreased, the branch situated in Fury had fallen into disgrace. The fact was that, differently from the Mercenaries' Union, whose branches were built at the end of commercial roads, and Golden Cauldron's branches, which were built next to forests and fertile ground, the Huntsman Guild was a nomadic group of sorts. In fact, whenever a new city was founded, its untouched surroundings were always a rich hunting ground. Consequently, when a new branch was opened within a new city, that branch would be automatically considered the new Huntsman Guild's headquarters. Fierce branch was thousands of years old, and numerous new branches have been opened in just as many younger cities. The main revenue of the Huntsman Guild came from experienced hunters who pushed themselves far from the city walls to look for stronger prey. "Next," said the woman behind the desk inside the Huntsman Guild's building. Daniel approached the counter and said, "I would like to apply for a hunting party or membership," said the woman. Daniel's brows furrowed. "Do I need one?" The woman looked him up for a few seconds, then responded, "Aren't you a little young to join a hunting party? These people hunt beasts. Ranked beasts. Are you going to hunt them, or are you going to feed them?" Her tone growing more displeased the more she talked. "If I want to be able to hunt them, I will at least feed one," said Daniel sarcastically. The woman started laughing, tears almost forming in the corner of her eyes. She barely stopped to say, "It would be even funnier if you weren't so skinny." She then stopped laughing, watched Daniel once more, and after realizing that he wasn't there to humor her, she turned serious and asked, "All right, kid, they'll put you up for a hunting party. When do you want to go?" "Right now," answered Daniel immediately. The woman furrowed her brows and looked at Daniel. She then asked, "Right now? Where are your weapons? You don't even have a bow." Daniel, looking embarrassed for the first time, responded, "Yeah, about that. I don't use the bow, but I might need a sword and a few throwing knives." The woman started laughing once more. She then said, "Well, you can always kill them from laughter." Haha. "All right, a membership costs 1 silver, renting a sword costs 10 copper, throwing knives go 4. After a good half an hour of explanations, Daniel was finally able to obtain his membership and join a hunting party. The members of his team were waiting for him at the first gate of the southwestern wall. When Daniel reached the gate, he noticed a group of 4 people waiting. One of them was a lean man. He seemed to be in his middle 20s, and he had an arched nose so big that it looked completely out of place. Strapped on his back was a longbow and a quiver filled with arrows. The second one was an older man that looked to be nearing his 60th birthday. His back was very straight, and while his clothes looked like a pile of dirty cloth, one could understand why he would pick that outfit when moving through the forest. His weapon was a set of short spears, which, similarly to the lean man, were strapped to his back. The remaining 2 people were a teenage boy and girl. Instinctively, one could guess that the 2 were a couple, but if one were to carefully look at their faces, they would notice the similarities in their features and eyes. The 2 were most likely brother and sister. The woman looked a year younger than the man, but they both looked like they were in their late teens. They both had blonde hair, green eyes, and bodies that looked like they were made for hunting. Both of them could be considered very attractive. The brother's weapon was a greatsword, while his sister's weapon were a pair of bolas hung to her belt. When Daniel approached the group, a mix of reactions could be seen in their faces. The 2 young teenagers furrowed their brows at him, then started discussing amongst themselves in whispers. The old man simply turned around and waited for the last person to arrive, and lastly, the only person who approached Daniel was the man in his mid-20s. "Can we help you with something?" said the man. "I'm your 5th," said Daniel while smiling. The man had no problems with Daniel being too young and inexperienced. After all, you were paid depending on the beast that you yourself killed, not by how many beasts were killed by the group. "Wonderful. We are waiting for our escort to arrive, then we'll depart right away," said the man jovially. Daniel nodded and then found a place to sit. Half an hour later, a robust man in leather armor and cleanly cut hair approached the group. A deep scar that started from above the middle of his eyebrow and finished on his cheekbone could be seen clearly, giving the man's face a permanent, serious expression. At his waist, he had a sword, and on his chest armor, a golden eagle was finely carved. Chapter 19, The First Kill, Sir. Thank you for being here, said the lean man with the large nose. According to the Huntsman Guild's regulations, in order to form a hunting party, the presence of an escort was required. That role was usually taken by a member of the mercenary union, or at times, by a licensed member of the army or city guard. The escort were required to have reached the cultivation rank set by the Huntsman Guild, which was the peak of the corresponding rank of the strongest known monsters of the area. For example, if the general strength of the beast inhabiting the area in which the hunting party was heading to was of the second rank, the escort needed to have at least reached the peak of the second rank. Their group's escort was set to be at the peak of rank 3, as powerful rank 3 beasts live within those canyons. Daniel's hunting party was heading out to hunt for steelback scorpions, a rank 2 beast which nested the canyons that separated the immense mountains of the Sinlia, the mountain range south of Fury. The canyons and mountains of the Sinlia, due to the large number of mines, had a constant stream of people coming and going. Therefore, after numerous reports of attacks from steelback scorpions had been sent to the city, the Huntsman Guild had been charged with the task of reducing their numbers within the practice zones. Names and guild badge, said the robust man in a domineering tone while taking a small list out of his pocket. Sella, Silver Hunter, said the lean man while handing his badge to the robust man. The rest of the group, used to this kind of procedure, took their badges out of their backpacks and handed them over to the escort while stating their names. Garth, said the old man in mimetic attire while handing over a pale gold badge. The teenage boy took a step forward and said, I am Lego, and she is my sister Fiora. We both are silver hunters. Daniel imitated what the rest of the group did and handed his newly acquired badge while stating his name. Done? Bronze Hunter. The brows of the entire group, except for the old man's, furrowed after Daniel's words. They collectively looked at him. The escort was the first to talk a bronze hunter. What the fuck do we need a bronze hunter for? How did you get assigned to this hunting party? Said the escort as rudely as he could. There must have been a mistake. Bronze rank is for rank 1 hunters, or first-time hunters. We are hunting for rank 2 beasts, said Sella, trying to calm the escort. This is my first mission, responded Daniel, confirming Sella's theory. After looking at Daniel one more time, the guard harumphed and said whatever. Brat, try not to slow the group down. He then turned toward the rest of the group and said, I am Stu, an elite of Corrales' army. From the military rank, the party could guess the strength of their escort. Similarly to hunters, the military grades existed to separate their members by strength. Those who had reached the rank 1, if part of the military, were common soldiers, while if part of the Huntsman Guild or mercenary union, they were considered as bronze members. The difference between military ranks and ranks granted by other types of groups was that one's cultivation wasn't enough to advance in the military. A mercenary or hunter could simply gain experience and, after reaching a new cultivation level, they could apply for a promotion within their group. Differently, soldiers had to pass various tests that would determine their ability to command. An elite was a member of the military that hadn't managed to pass the test to advance to the next grade. So, instead of being a lieutenant, Stu had the rank of elite sergeant. This ensured the party that their escort was of, at least, the peak of rank 3. Let's move out, said Stu, before heading toward the city gates. 50 kilometers south of Fury, 21:38 after 12 hours of uninterrupted walking, the hunting party had decided to set camp for the night. During their journey, none of them, except for Sella, had talked much. Daniel considered him the group's chatterbox. The members of the hunting party had been approached more than once by him and hoped to start conversation, but whenever Sella approached Daniel, he would start playing with his throwing knives. He would always pretend to be a beginner, almost dropping them and scaring Sella into leaving him alone. The rest of the group gave him no more chances than he did. The escort acted annoyed whenever he was talked to. The two siblings would keep to themselves, and the old man refused to interact even if talked to. 5 tents had been set around a small campfire. Daniel was on guard duty, so he sat on a tree stump next to the campfire. In his hand, a piece of dried meat which he munched on slowly. The rest of the group was resting inside their tents. For hours passed uneventfully. Only the noises of insects lurking within the grass reached Daniel's ears. They had yet to reach the mountains, so their camp had been set on a patch of forest that had been cleared of trees. Only a few tree stumps remained. Daniel got up on his feet, and as he was about to go to Garth's tent, whose guard duty was about to start, he heard a distant scream coming from behind the tree line. The scream was a terrified one, and it sounded like the scream of a woman. Primary quest started. Just a wandering hero. Description: save those in need. First objective set: save the woman in distress from a beast. Optional: kill the bandit mage along with his summoned beast. Optional: kill the hidden bandits. Reward: karma plus 300, plus 200, plus 500, time limit. For minutes, damn it. With no time to think, all Daniel could do was grab his sword and dash towards the tree line while shouting bandits. Half a minute later, he had reached the tree line. While closing in, he had noticed flashes of various colored lights coming from behind the trees, signs that a battle was taking place. So, my alternatives? Open approach difficulty, extreme, defeat the beast along with its summoner. Survive the bandit group's assault until the arrival of reinforcements from your party. Time limit: 3 minutes 20 seconds. Countdown: 5 minutes and 34 seconds. Requirements: rank 4 of martial cultivation or rank 4 of spiritual cultivation. Reward plus 200%, 1000 KP. Defensive approach difficulty: hard. Support the woman until the arrival of reinforcements from your party. Time limit: 3 minutes and 20 seconds countdown. 5 minutes and 34 seconds. Reward plus 150%, 350 KP. Stealthy approach difficulty: hard. Sneak attack the summoner hidden 35 meters southeast from your position. Do not alert the remaining group of bandits laying in wait 150 meters southeast from your position. Time limit: 3 minutes and 20 seconds. Reward plus 150%, 350 KP. With quiet steps, Daniel started heading towards the summoner's location. As he was closing in, he had managed to see the two battling parties. One was a woman in dark green robes, her face covered by a large hood. She was kneeling behind a thick wall of ice. On the other side was a creature that Daniel had never seen. Its body had a humanoid shape and it walked on 2 feet, but its surface was covered in patches of rock, glued together by a thin layer of glowing lava. It looked like the lava lake on which melting rocks were slowly floating. From in between these glued rocks, molten lava dripped whenever it moved. This summoned beast was a lava elemental, which was summoned by mixing earth and fire magic. This combination of elements wasn't unusual for elemental mages. For example, during the war in which Daniel's father had died, the mage that had summoned the meteor shower which had wiped that division out of existence had used a combination of fire and earth magic. Of course, Daniel didn't know anything about this. This lava elemental kept spouting a constant stream of molten rock out of his hands, which then crashed with the woman's ice wall, creating thin bubbles of lava filled with scorching steam. The ice wall kept repairing under the elemental's attacks, but unfortunately, it couldn't keep up with the speed it was melting. Only 2 minutes were left until the time limit. So Daniel stopped spectating the magical fight and approached the summoner from the other side. He was currently 10 meters behind him. Only a few trees were in between them. In his hands, he held 2 throwing knives. Step after step, Daniel approached the summoner, as he thought that he could avoid killing him and force him to surrender by pointing his sword at him. A snapping sound came from under his feet. Shit! Panic filled Daniel's heart as the mage turned around. But as soon as his eyes landed on Daniel, 2 small knives pierced through his throat and chest. In front of the shocked eyes of the dying summoner stood a teenager with an expression filled with dread. In his mind, shame and regret for dying by this brat's hands. The moment the summoner dropped on the ground, the red flashes coming from the place where the battle was taking place disappeared. By reading the quest description, Daniel had guessed that when a summoner dies, the summoned beast disappears as well, and now his guess had been confirmed. Shaking off the thoughts of having just killed a person, he approached the summoner's body and took his backpack. He then rushed toward the place where the battle had just ended. What he found in between the charred trees was the woman in green robes. She was laying above the only patch of unburned grass and looked to be unconscious. Daniel knew that the rest of the bandits were nearby, so he decided to take the woman and go back to the camp. In a few long steps, he arrived next to the woman's body, but as he was about to grab her, the woman's arm moved. Daniel had a knife pressed at his neck. The sharp blade had only dug half a millimeter into Daniel's skin, so no blood came out. The woman, expecting him to be the summoner, had gone for the kill. If Daniel hadn't been a martial cultivator and his skin wasn't as durable as leather, he would have gotten his throat cut. Before the woman could react, Daniel grabbed her wrist with one hand and to close her mouth with the other. "Shoo, I am not one of those who attacked you. I am the one who killed the other mage," he whispered. The woman didn't look convinced, and as she kept struggling, Daniel continued, "I'll let you go now, but if you scream, they'll just run away and leave you to the group of bandits that's approaching. Do you understand?" He said, his tone slightly annoyed. After a few moments, the woman seemed to have slightly calmed down. She nodded weakly, and Daniel removed his hand from her mouth. "Who or why you?" asked the woman with a trembling voice. Daniel helped her up and responded, "I'm a hunter from the Huntsman Guild. My party is camped 200 meters from here. Can you run?" "I can't. I can't even use magic. That elemental was so strong. They killed my guard," she said, almost on the verge of tears. Daniel looked at her for a moment. Only a pair of heart-shaped pink lips could be seen from under her hood. "Remember not to scream. And, sorry for this." The last part had been said with a hint of embarrassment. The woman was slightly confused, but right the next moment, she realized why. Daniel had wrapped his arm around her waist and lifted her over his shoulder, then started running before she could fight back. Chapter 20, you know how it will end amongst knees to the chest and punches to his back. Daniel managed to take the mage out of the forest. At that point, a message appeared inside Daniel's mind. Just a wandering hero, first objective completed. Reward, 1250 karma points. Am I even a hero at this point? I'm getting paid after all, Daniel thought, while an odd smile grew in his face. After leaving the forest, Daniel encountered the rest of his hunting party. "What is going on? Where are the bandits? And who the hell is that?" "Sit still." Daniel put the mage down and then gave the escort a grim look while saying, "Do you want some answers, or do you want to keep asking questions?" He then looked at the whole group and continued, "I've heard screaming, so I rushed toward the forest. About a hunt." He explained everything that happened in detail. This time, the first to talk was the sister of the two siblings, Fiora. "You are saying that you've sneaked up on a dual elementalist summoner?" she asked incredulously. Garth, the old man in mimetic attire, responded for Daniel, "What is so strange about it? We are hunters, aren't we?" Of the hunting party, he was the most adept with stealthy behavior, as he needed to reach a certain distance to make good use of his throwing spears. The old man had noticed the few throwing knives strapped on Daniel's thighs, and the exact height in which they were placed, which was perfect for someone experienced to easily take them at any time. This had convinced him that Daniel wasn't a beginner at throwing knives. Differently, the two siblings were used to hunt in couple. The girl would trap the prey with her bolus, and her brother would finish it with his greatsword. Their approach was a direct one, while instead, Sella was an archer, so he didn't have a use for sneaking as close to the prey. Still looked at the bag that Daniel was holding on his right arm. He didn't recall it being part of his belongings. "Is that the summoner's bag?" he then asked all of a sudden. His look one agreed. A slightly disdainful smile grew on Daniel's face. He answered no, it's hers. Daniel had expected him to ask about the bag, but he had no intention of handing it over. What made him so sure that he would be asked about it was the dark red 962 floating above Stu's head. He had noticed the karma of every member of the hunting party the very moment he had met them. He was about to start a journey with these people, and knowing if one of them had bad intentions, would certainly not hurt him. The siblings had an overall neutral number above their heads. Daniel had guessed that they had spent their time accepting missions within the Huntsman Guild, while instead, Garth and Celis were slightly positive. The only person who had a negative karma was their escort. "Humph, Stu's eyes narrowed as he looked at the covered woman standing next to Daniel. "Who are you?" he then asked. The woman removed her cape, and what was uncovered made them all think that calling her a woman was a stretch. The female mage happened to be a beautiful girl that seemed to be in her mid-teens. Her body shape was completely covered by the oversized green cape, but her visage was a spectacle to behold. Her straight hair flowed down her back like a dark silver waterfall. Her steep arched brows stood above natural, swiping lashes. Her deep-set eyes enclosed a pair of emerald green irises, inside which pupils as black as the coldest of nights could be seen. She had a serious expression, but it wasn't clear if that was caused by tiredness or by her cold-looking appearance. The young mage took a slow bow. "My name is Yala. I am an alchemist of the Golden Cauldron. The rest of my group and I were attacked early this morning. I managed to escape, but I was found out when I lit a fire. Thank you for saving me," she said between heavy breaths. The members of the hunting party bowed in response, embarrassed about being thanked regardless of not playing any part in a rescue. The only one that didn't bow was the escort. His eyes were stuck at Yala's beauty, lust growing clearer by the moment. While nobody noticed them, Garth's hand moved close to the spears strapped to his back, and Daniel's hand approached the hilt of his sword. "Let's go back to the camp," said Stu. Minutes later, the group had arrived at their camp. The eyes of Garth and Daniel had never left the escort's body. They both understood from the greed he showed towards the bag, and the lust he didn't bother to hide for the female mage, that he would have tried something soon. An additional reason for their alertness was that, in case he did try something, that meant that at some point through their mission, the escort would certainly try to silence them. Harming and stealing from the party one had been hired to protect was a huge taboo. Anyone accused of it, if found guilty, would be blacklisted from both the mercenaries and huntsmen's groups. Unfortunately, the escort was usually stronger than the rest of the party members. Adding the fact that they were trained and used to battle against other humans, they were usually capable of wiping out the entire hunting party on their own and get out of trouble by slightly injuring themselves and claiming that the rest of the party had perished during a sudden attack from a group of beasts. In that case, the escort would not be paid even if he delivered the beast carcasses or beast cores, as it counted as failing his mission, but he wouldn't suffer any consequence either. When they reached the camp, as the escort was about to say something to the female mage, Daniel said out loud, "It's Garth's turn to keep watch. She can use your tent, right?" "Sure thing, kiddo," said Garth promptly. A clear layer of frustration could be seen on Stu's face. He couldn't retort to any of their words, so he went back into his tent in silence. Daniel nodded at Garth, which smiled in response, then went back to his own tent. Time passed slowly as Daniel sat quietly in his tent. In front of him, 3 books, various herbs, and about a dozen beast cores of various ranks. 2 were rank 3 cores, while the remaining 9 were of rank 2. This was the content of the summoner's bag. Daniel didn't know the last thing about herbs, as he had never had a chance to study them, so he put them away for the moment. He also put the beast cores away, as he had no intention of cultivating right now. The only remaining thing in front of him were the 3 books. On these 3 book covers, clear titles were written in black. These books' titles were Fire Element, Flaming Wisp Dash, Earth Element, Stone Skin, and Basics and Theories of Summoning Magic, Volume 1-. It was the first time for Daniel to see magic books. He had never considered becoming a mage. As for him, magic was a world detached from his. But since these books had fallen onto his lap, he decided to try them out. The first book he decided to read was the Manual for the Earth Element's Magic, Stone Skin. Daniel was an agile person, and he was capable of reacting to a speed faster than others. But he had never fought one-on-one against another martial practitioner of his level. His entire preparation was his natural speed and the basic knowledge of movement, sword, halberd, and knife throwing. The book was filled with illustrations which Daniel didn't understand. Weird symbols covered the upper part of each page. Luckily enough, on the bottom part, a translation was written in the common language. / the spirit connects us to the spiritual plane. / mana will be traded for spiritual essence. / spiritual essence allows the use of magic. slash stronger the connection, the more refined the essence. Slash stone skin slash channel spiritual essence into your body. Slash guide it through the pores of your skin. Slash form a thin layer and turn it into earth essence. The book's translation was written in short sentences, but Daniel was still able to grasp the method. He closed the book and put it on the ground before starting to practice. Since the moment he had fallen unconscious that day in the forest, he always felt this thin connection to the spiritual plane. He didn't know how to explain it. He simply felt an entity inside him, which was both him and not. That was his spirit. If one tried to explain it, they would describe it like a well built within your house. You knew that the water within was yours, but you also knew that this well was connected to a much larger body of water. He could feel his spirit, but he had never interacted with it until now. He focused on his naturally built ki and tried to channel it within his spirit. The reaction was the same as pouring oil into a bowl already full of water. The more ki he pushed through his spirit, the more spiritual essence he could feel run through his body. After a few minutes, he felt like he had reached the maximum capacity of spiritual essence he could hold within his body. He had tried to take more, but the extra spiritual essence was pushed out of his body and dispersed in the air. He now had two different kinds of essences within his body, ki and spiritual essence. These two essences were like water and oil, meaning that merging them was impossible. Their nature was simply too different, as if they belonged to different worlds. Daniel tried to focus the spiritual essence within his hand and slowly pushed it through the pores of his skin. Nothing happened. He quickly realized that he didn't know how to turn spiritual essence into earth essence. He thought about it for a few minutes, but there were still no results, so he decided to give up for now. When he got up from his sitting position and tried to get some sleep, after touching the ground, he saw that a thin layer of stone slowly covered the skin of his hand. So it is like this. I am simply not familiar enough with the elements, thought Daniel while touching the thin layer of stone that covered his hand. His guess was right. Mages needed to spend a lot of time trying to understand the elements they wished to control. What they needed to learn was how to replicate the essence without being in direct contact with it. Daniel had started to feel excited about magic, so he grabbed another manual. But as he was about to start reading it, he heard talking outside of his tent. He then got up and left his tent. In front of him, Garth was sitting around the campfire, and a few meters away, Stu was standing. Stu had left his tent in the middle of the night and went towards Garth's tent, in which Yala was resting. Garth had asked him if something was wrong, but the response he had received was an aggressive one. "Is everything all right? Have the bandits found us?" said Daniel. Stu's face grew even more annoyed, and through gritted teeth he said, "I have to ask a few questions to the mage. If there is a bandit group, he'll have to write a report. He'll come too. I was there, Eve seen, and fought them after all," responded Daniel while pretending to be collaborating. The escort had reached his breaking point. With his back exposed to the two, he said in a threatening tone, "Mind your own business from now on. If you want to go back to the city." Primary quest started. Just a wandering hero. Description: save those in need. Second objective set: save Yala from Stu. Optional: prevent Garth's death. Optional: kill Stu. Reward: Karma plus 200, plus 500, plus 100, / Golden Cauldron reputation plus 50%. Daniel's tone turned just as serious. You know how it will end. That's why your hand is on the hilt of your sword.